Hey there, this is Patrick Beaver Learning Resource Center, and we're going live with De-Stress the Test. And here's our presenters, and they're going to introduce themselves to you and give you some tips on, after they introduce themselves, they're going to give you some tips on things for parents to remember.
Okay, so we're excited to be here. I am Tammy Brown, and I'm from Newton Conover City Schools. I'm the K-8 director. I also work with Title I and ESL services. And I'm just here to explain to you that I think that you need to take a breath for the first moment of your life and just say to yourself that it's going to be okay. This is one moment in time when your children are actually looking at a test. It's one piece of data. We don't just look at one piece of data, we look at all kinds of data on your students. So when you start to think about that, I want you to stop and breathe. I tell my kids all the time that they have to breathe, but the parent also has to breathe. And sometimes our parents are the ones who don't breathe the most. So if you start teaching yourself how to breathe, and we call those belly breaths, so start looking at how can you make yourself breathe. And that means you have to feel the breath in your belly come out. So practice with me. You're going to breathe in and out. And so if you start doing that multiple times throughout test taking, you're going to be able to de-stress yourself. And so that is one of the very key things for us. And I also wanted to make sure you're aware that so many times we put such value on a particular test. I want you to stop that. It is very important for the test to take place because we need to know how your kids are doing. But that test does not define a student. So I want you to remember that just because a student doesn't do well on a test does not mean that that student is not exceptional in many, many areas. So many times we think that this one test says this kid can't do something. That's not true. It means that that kid may need some extra support in an area or may need to be able to be supported in certain contents, but that doesn't mean that that kid can't do well. So that is something you need to encourage your kid. My own kid is a very great student. However, he struggles with science. And so when he comes home and he knows he has to have a science test, we go through the same thing that you do as a parent. I go through the same thing with him of, it's going to be okay. I am not worried about that test. Go in there and do your very best. That's all I'm asking you to do. And reminding them that that is not going to define who you are. You're still my child. You're still going to do well in what you do in life. I know you're going to do well. So find that thing that they value the most and you encourage that. He's a movie buff. So I constantly am saying, you may not have to know the scientific method in order to do what job you want to do in your life. It's okay. Everybody has their uniqueness and we want to find what that is.
Thank you, Tammy.
Hi, I'm Rene Huntsinger, and I am the school counselor at Jenkins Elementary School, and this is my 4th year at Jenkins. And I just want to thank you for the privilege to be able to speak today. And I have to keep notes because I chase rabbits, and I might even chase a few, even with my notes. But I did want to talk a little bit about a different perspective of anxiety. I think probably grad school, when you're looking at counseling and psychology and crisis and behavior, that was the first time I had ever realized that, when the professor says anxiety is normal, a certain amount of anxiety, we all have that normal level of anxiety, but that normal level of anxiety is what helps us to be responsible for the tasks of life. In fact, I've got a little bit of anxiety right now, and that's why I'm here, because my boss said, you're going to this thing on anxiety. So, because I love my job, I'm here. So it's normal. Our normal level of anxiety gets us to work. It helps us to take care of our bodies because, let's face it, none of us want to go to the gym. But we have that level of anxiety that gets us to the gym because we want to take care of ourselves so that we can, grow old healthy. A normal level of anxiety helps us take care of our children when we're exhausted, but, because we want to care for them, it helps us to get up and do what we need. If it wasn't for the normal level of anxiety, we would just be so passive that, we wouldn't care about anything and nothing would get done. And it's really sad because we do have these passive people in our community, and it is truly sad to see them and the lives, not really caring about anything. And so helping people to engage and be motivated and things like that. But I want to take the normal level of anxiety and take it one step further. And I would like to give some reasons why higher levels of anxiety and stress can be viewed as positive, and ways to help your students view it as positive and kind of take a different perspective. Now, I do want to preface this with, when I'm talking about higher levels of anxiety and stress, I'm referring to the context of why we're here today in this forum for a semi-brief time of anxiety due to, in this event, test taking. Because we all know that, sustained stress and anxiety can lead to some serious health problems. But the short-term anxiety and stress that's associated with an event, and in this case, test taking, I want to reframe that. And I've thought about this, I've seen some things about this, but I wanted to be able to have something specific to share here today that was credible. And so I did find an article by a psychologist, Kelly McGonigal, and she helps us to reframe the stress. She says that anxiety and the stress associated with it is actually preparing us for action. It can help us to be more productive. And so if you're breathing faster, it's getting oxygen to your brain. This can actually boost attention and memory performance. So I want to look at anxiety and stress in this context from a positive perspective. So the symptoms, let's talk about the symptoms of what your child may be experiencing with the stress and anxiety. They have a faster heartbeat, they have sweaty palms, they have butterflies, they have lots of energy running through their body. And now let's think about the times when your child experiences those, or we experience that. Taking a test? Yeah, maybe. But let's also look at some other important events that we have those same symptoms when we're excited about a surprise or a sporting event, whether we are the spectator of a sporting event or our child, or we're actually participating in the sporting event. And I would also say falling in love. Those are all things that we have those same symptoms, and they're anxiety. I mean, that's exactly what that's a higher level of anxiety. So these symptoms do not necessarily mean that you're going to perform badly. It actually, those symptoms can help you. When we care about something, and in this case, it's doing well on a test, our body tells the nervous system to release that energy and to deliver more oxygen to the brain. And this helps us to stay alert, to pay attention. So now the question comes, okay, well then how can I help my student open up to this mindset? Like, how can I get my student in this mindset and to this perspective? So here are some reframing tools that I just jotted down. You can tell your students. Your increase in anxiety is a way of energizing your body. It's getting you prepared for something that's about to happen that's important. Before the test, maybe the night before, you can help your students to flush out the negative thoughts associated with the anxiety. And that would be important to, identify those feelings. The fast heartbeat, the sweaty palms, the butterflies, the energy that they're experiencing, and to replace these ideas with the things that I have mentioned previously. It can be done by writing. It can be done by mindfulness. Mindfulness is something that we're all talking about, in education right now, because it works. And you can Google mindfulness. There are mindfulness apps. I think they're very, very effective. We have classrooms that do that on a regular basis. Also, to have that conversation with your child while they're moving. And I know that sounds a little far-fetched, a little weird, but moving while trying to have a conversation helps us to replace those new thoughts. And it's actually a cognitive behavioral technique, and also they use it with PTSD because it helps the brain to move past those negative thoughts and to replace those negative thoughts with the positive thoughts. Help your students to develop a growth mindset, by replacing those thoughts. In other words, your child might say, "This test is too hard and I'll probably fail." Replace that with, "This test is really challenging, so you're still saying that it's too hard, so I need to do my best." That's just a growth mindset mentality. The last thing that I want to say to re-emphasize what has already been said is that you need to help your students understand that the test can only measure certain things. Tests do not measure, and I jotted a few things down that I could think of. It does not measure computer technology. It doesn't measure, at least we're talking EOGs. Okay, so EOGs, mind you. Computer technology, it does not measure history. The EOGs do not measure art ability, talent, work ethic, honesty, nor integrity. And I think as a parent, I'm a parent too, something to think about your child and to have that conversation with your child is not how smart are you, it's how are you smart. And you know, we all have abilities in some way. Test taking might not be your child's ability. You know, some children are gifted at that ability, and I just, on a personal note, just to kind of personalize it a little bit, I had a daughter, she's now 24, she just turned 24, and she was a terrible test taker, horrible test taker, but she graduated from Clemson University in 2017. So, you know, her test-taking abilities did not hinder the fact that she, you know, was able to enroll in a very, you know, nice school and graduate. I can't say she graduated with honors, but she does have a diploma.
Still the same.
She does have a piece of paper, you know. So I challenge you to talk with your child about their abilities. You know, are they have an ability in sports or art, empathy, kindness. And the very last thing that I want to leave you with is also remind them of this. They may not know who Steve Jobs is, may or may not. I'm sure they talk about Albert Einstein in class. I don't know what grade, but curriculum person could tell me. But neither of these gentlemen performed in school. They both did very poor in school, but their genius and their gifts and their talents are indisputable. So, you know, I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it. And, you know, like she said, I don't want to repeat everything she said, but just, you know, all of the techniques, but just reframing the fact that we put such a negative connotation on anxiety, the short-term anxiety. So, thank you.
My name is Beth Embree, and I work for the Catawba County Schools District, and I am a school counselor at St. Stephen's Elementary, and this is my 16th year being a school counselor. So I wanted to share, I feel like there are lots of components that go into play whenever we think about performance or success as scored by EOGs or end of grade benchmarks. And I think that what it boils down to is that there's a lot of different people that have to take responsibilities for those components. Now, as a school counselor, I cannot help with the academic piece. That is certainly something that our teachers take on, and I think they do an exceptional job making sure that our teachers have the the understanding of what the content is or the curriculum. As far as a school counselor and as a parent, I feel like the two areas that are very challenging for students when they do take an EOG, the first area being stamina, and the second area being mindset. And that's where that anxiety does come into play. So I brought just these are two handouts. I teach children, so I brought handouts that I give to children, and so I'll share those with you guys. And Angela, I don't know if you can share those online, however. But I'll flip over on the back side first and talk about mindset. As far as mindset, when we, do you want one of those? Yeah, that'd be great. When we talk about mindset, the two strategies that I take within the school setting, and I think it's totally appropriate for parents to take it at home, is informing and empowering. And so with the children at my school, what we talk a lot about is percentile ranks. I think they get hung up on scores and proficiency, or passing as they understand it. It's very intimidating to our students because we have a wide or broad range of students in different performance levels, especially when we think about needs and concerns that they have. So what our approach is at our school, we actually call it the Own It Challenge, but we challenge our students to first understand who they are as a student, what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are. And basically we help them identify what their percentile rank is in both reading and math. And our goal for all students is to help them understand that it is not about passing. We actually make a big deal. Don't tell anybody else is what we tell them, but we don't care if you pass the test. We only care if you raise your percentile rank. And so that allows us to take off the plate the passing piece or the proficiency piece for our kiddos. For some kids, they do pass the year before, so yes, they're going to need to pass again, but we just take the focus off proficiency and we talk about raising their rank or growing. And so it's very powerful because we have students that have disabilities, learning disabilities, or language, barriers. And we tell them it doesn't matter if you're at first percentile rank or if you're at 89th percentile rank, you are only trying to be better than yourself last year. And I think that when you ladies talk about framing it, I think that is, very powerful in the sense that they can see that there's, number one, a concrete numerical goal to what they're trying to reach, and so they can determine whether or not they reach that goal. It is very minute when you say 1 percentile rank. We in the education world know that that's actually a significant amount of growth. However, to them, one rank doesn't seem quite as intimidating. And so we then talk about, the association that anytime they hear percentile ranks, they need to always think about a mountain, because really percentile ranks are just to help us to describe a performance level. And so on EOGs, the performance level is reading or math or science or whatever, content area for an end of course test. But, I always tell the kids, like if this were my percentile rank and we were talking about my gardening skills, now this is where I would probably perform, because I can grow flowers. But then, we compare it to something like you were saying earlier, something that I might not be as successful at, and saying that it would be totally appropriate for me to figure as an artist, it's not my strength at all, that I might be at 5th percentile if I was being very generous with myself. And if I wanted to become a better artist, then I would practice, I would ask questions, I would get coaching, I would do all those things they do as great students, and my personal goal would be to be at 6th percentile, not 5th. And not that I'm trying to go from 5th percentile to 90th. And so I think that one piece of mindset takes a lot of pressure off of our kids that they have to pass or they have to be a 5. And so we kind of do a lot of silliness helping them understand that it's about their percentile rank and not so much about proficiency. The other piece with mindset is on the other side, and that's with empowering students. And I feel like the more we can make them feel that they are in control, then they will feel like they have more power over the situation. Again, as the educators in the room, we know that there's not very many things that we can control about EOGs, what the content or what the questions are, and how many questions and the day they choose the test and all of that. That's all out of our control. But these are just some silly strategies that I have taught children over the years, and they have them memorized because we do it every year, and they kind of teach me now. But so I'll just kind of go over some of those things. The first that I tell them is they have to get charged like a cell phone. They all understand the meaning behind a cell phone, and that if it doesn't have a charge, not only does it not work well, it can cut off in the middle of the test. But that even with my cell phone, when it has a lower charge, things don't work as well. Like my flash might not work on my camera, and my signal might not be as strong. And helping them see that they have to have sleep in order to be the best performance they can the next day. We talk about dress like an onion, which is obviously talking, not the stinky part, but the layer part. They always giggle at that, but we want to make sure that children know that they can be empowered in choosing their outfit for the day. And we talk a lot about, not picking something that's scratchy or itchy, or, some students are very bothered by tags, or, just a lot of variety in making sure that they have their success outfit. And we talk about the temperature in the room, because we all know that sometimes that can change on the morning of the test, and, they might have worn a tank top and the air is, full blast and they're frigid. So we just empower them to choose an outfit that will make them feel successful and in control of what they're wearing. The third strategy is to eat like Goldilocks, and basically that's just to let them know, in my experience, that I have seen children that, their parents took them out for a power breakfast before they came to take the test that day, and they probably had too much. They have the pancakes and the gravy and the fruit and the toast, and they come in and they're just about to explode, which is uncomfortable for them. And then we also have the students that wake up that morning and they do feel kind of nervous. They have the butterflies in their stomach, and so they think, well, I'm not going to eat anything because I don't feel good. And then, we make a comedy routine of what your belly sounds like in the middle of the test when you haven't eaten. So eating like Goldilocks, making sure they plan ahead. They need to talk with their parents about, what's a good breakfast that they feel comfortable eating, so they can have that available in the house. The fourth is their favorite. We say play it like a video game. And we talk a lot about the fact that EOGs are very similar to video games in that the number one goal is to see what level you can get to. Number two, how many points can you earn? And for us, that would be their scale score. For every question they get right, their scale score goes up. And third of all, it's to show off. You know, I tell the kids, I've never ever seen one kid that gets nervous or anxious or stressed out about sitting down to play a video game because they cannot wait to show what their skills are and all the strategies they've learned to see how far along they can get in the game. And so, you know, we tell them to play it like a video game. Come in with that positive mindset that you're going to show off what you've learned this year. You're going to see what level you can get to, how many points you can earn. Slow and steady wins the race is our 5th strategy, and that really comes into where that stamina is talking, you know, we were talking about. You know, our kids go in and they go gung-ho on that first passage or the first 10 math questions, and they give it their all, and if they haven't paced themselves, when they get to question 40 or 50, it can become very overwhelming. It is a long day, a long testing setting, and so we talk a lot about, you know, that stamina piece. Watch out for bubble trouble. We do a lot of discussion on their bubble sheet and how they have to take care of that and how they have to be concerned about its physical appearance when a student pokes a hole in it or they wrinkle it, or, you know, we joke about some kids draw artwork on them, and we just talk about the fact that those bubble sheets don't get scanned or they don't scan correctly. And so giving them the mindset that they can control that their bubble sheet is in good condition and, you know, is in good shape for whenever it goes to get scanned at the county office. We just feel like it empowers them, making sure they know that they need to answer every question, that educated guess, you know, process of elimination kind of piece. And the last one is my favorite, and it's called Always Use Your Testing Salute. And so we kind of do a thing at school where, you know, the kids hold up both pointer fingers. And this is a very powerful piece because a lot of students, because of that stamina piece, when they get to the end of the testing setting, they're ready to close the book and turn it in and be done with it. And so we always say that when you finish the test, you always have to salute it. And the way that you salute your test is that you turn back to question number 1 in your test book, and you put one finger on number 1, and then you put one finger on number 1 in your answer sheet. And most of the time, children have been conditioned to circle their answers in their book, and we always want them to go back and check that they circled A on their, you know, their test booklet, that they did actually bubble A. And so we just teach them the process of checking. A lot of times kids find that they got misaligned, or they thought they bubbled in their answer and they forgot, or they came across a question that was really difficult and they circled it and thought, well, I'll come back to it, and then they forgot to come back to it because they were so ready to get finished. But the testing salute just kind of gives them that final breath of fresh air before they get their test to the teacher, that they have checked everything that they should have. So those are the pieces that I use to teach with a student to help with that mindset piece. For parents, the stamina thing, I think that is very helpful for parents to do at home is, you know, hear the teachers out on the reading every night. We have found the more students that invest in reading every night and reading on their level, you know, even if we can just get them started on reading, but if they can read every night on with content or text on their level, that has been such a powerful improver for our students because it affects both reading and math. And the second is, and it is the, you know, the moans and groans from the students, but limiting that screen time. It's just, it is doing a number on our, on how stimulated our children are by that media. And so sitting down to a paper pencil test and it becoming a 2 or 3 hour test, they just can't stick with it. And so I think as a parent, you know, reading every night and limiting screen time is probably a very powerful piece too.
I'm Ric Vandett. I retired school superintendent in Hickory, and moderator for this event to ask some questions of the panel, but also here as a grandparent of a child in a middle school who does experience some test anxiety. So I'm here to learn too, as much as I can, to share with his parents, and some way for Grandpa to help him out in some way.
Perfect.
And we do have a few questions if we can get started. Let me start with questions, and we will ask you some questions, and if the audience wants to call in and make some questions.
Yeah, through Facebook, if you have questions, go ahead and submit them, and I hope that I can see them.
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out.
We have a number of questions, and I think you've seen the question. One I want to ask is, if there's so much stress and somebody's placing some importance on these tests, why are these tests so important? Let me start on the end, and just come on down.
So I think you have to keep in mind that we have to have some way of having accountability for everything that happens within the school. And so This test is really to see how your children are doing, how your students are doing, so that the teachers are well aware of where their weaknesses are and where we need to improve and how we can help them. So we have to have this for our federal government. Our state requires us to have a letter grade, so we get these grades out there, and just like you, teachers, administrators, central office, we all have that stress upon us to say, we got to do better every single year. So we've got to see some improvement. However, I want to go back to say to you that it is very critical to understand that, yeah, it's important that we have these grades and they do well, but the most important piece is that we're showing the academic growth. Are we growing our children? If we're growing our children, then these other things are going to come. It's going to happen. So it's more of the accountability pieces where I think it comes down to is an accountability of how are we doing so that we can prove to the world that we are teaching the kids what they need to know so that they can be productive citizens in the world. And they have this established curriculum that they need to understand so that we can be college and career ready, so that when they get into college, they do well, but when they exit college, they can be what they need to be in the world. So does that answer that question?
So I really, honestly, I don't have anything to add to that. I think the accountability piece, and I do think that's important for the student to understand that they're almost taking a test about their teacher.
Right.
You
Right.
know,
Right.
I mean,
In their
that's
school.
that's hard to say that.
But it
But you know,
is.
let's just address that. It really is saying this is how much my teacher taught me.
Did
And,
your teacher do the job?
Right, exactly. And, you know, the NCDPI, they come up with the norms on this test, you know, with the curriculum mapping and things like that. And I think, you know, let's just give a specific example. If every student in the 5th grade is struggling with a specific concept in math, well, then that tells the Department of Education that, you know, well, maybe we need to map this differently. We need to lay out our curriculum differently. We need to teach this step before this step. So I do think it's important. I don't know that students can really wrap their head around that as much, because it does, you know, then why is my teacher not having to sit here for 3 or 4 hours and bubble, you know? But it really is telling our districts and our state and our federal government, how are these teachers doing? And, you know, and I can say from Hickory Public Schools, our teachers do a phenomenal job, so I want to get that on
Yes.
record. I do want to get that on record. But, you know, and there again, I think there was one question in this too that kind of goes along with that. I think it also helps us, you know, when the norms are set and then we have those outliers, you know, it helps us, that also helps us to flag students that, you know, there possibly could be a learning disability. You know, that's just one more check and balance for us to be accountable to help the student, you know, to differentiate and to see what needs to be done to support that student, so.
Anything you'd like to add, Beth?
You
I think they've touched it all. The reassuring thing that I always tell parents when they seem to be frustrated with the standardized testing is it is nice to know that, you know, a child in Catawba County is being tested on the same exact standards as a child in Wilmington or a child, you know, in Robbinsville. It's helpful to know that all the staff members and all the students are held to the same standard. And the very powerful thing with that is that then when we get scores, we can compare different classroom settings and different school districts on how that, you know, is coming about, you know, what the instruction is like and what pieces may need to be met, so.
The parents get information, and they get information based on levels that their children have obtained. Rene, would you mind sharing what those levels mean?
Okay, so I did actually write a couple of things down on this. I think that was question 2. So in the EOGs, there are 5 levels, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 3 is actually the mastery level. 1 or 2 is non-mastery of the curriculum, but there again, going to the point before, you know, you have to think about the students that are getting those maybe 1s or 2s. That's great information to have because it's going to help us, you know, flag that student for maybe some things, because if you're seeing a pattern, you know, across the board from math to English in 3rd grade or reading in 3rd grade, and then 4th grade, they're still struggling, you know, I think that it just gives a wealth of information. So 3 is mastery, obviously 3, 4, 5 is mastery, and then 1, 2 are non-mastery of the curriculum.
Beth, what can you tell a parent who gets a result and says, my child's a level 1? something wrong with
I
my
would
child.
I'd pull out the percentile rank mountain.
Right.
No, speaking for someone that comes from a school where we have had a history of several students that score at level 1s and level 2s, the discouraging part is when you see that, you feel like, oh, my child wasn't successful. And again, I go straight back to what was their performance level the year before. If they're a third grader, what was their beginning of grade performance level? To me, I think if we could shift for our students and our parents the focus on growth, like you mentioned, rather than proficiency or being on grade level, I think it's much more powerful, because if you have a child that performs at level 1 in third grade and they test this year and they bring home a level 2, it breaks my heart to think that somebody would be disappointed in that, because that is a significant amount of growth for that child, beyond a year's worth of growth. And so just having those levels is discouraging for that reason. Of course, we have to have, that for, testing purposes and reporting purposes. But I would certainly begin that conversation with a parent by looking at where did they come from? What score did they come from, or what percentile rank did they come from? Because, the growth is the important piece. Because if your child grew, then eventually, my philosophy is they continue to grow, they eventually will reach proficiency.
Each of you has touched on this already, but if you can sort of very briefly share with the parents who may be listening, from this point, from today to the first day of the test, how can parents help their children sort of prepare for them?
Well, I think you have to have some conversations at home. I think you have to have the conversations before this point, but I think critically now, from now until the first day of testing, you need to start having those conversations of building up the confidence of your child and letting them know that you are there and you know what they do well, and you already know their weaknesses and you already know their areas that they struggle in, and talking them through the understanding of, I believe in you. I believe in you no matter what comes back at the end of the day. Whatever that test ends up being, we're going to sit down and talk about it. We're going to get you the support that you need, but you're going to do the very best you can do when you walk in there. So having those conversations early. I'll go back to some other things that I used when I was a principal. I talked to my kids about a lot. Make sure you get plenty of sleep. Make sure you're going out and exercising. Exercise helps. Getting outdoors. Get away from that video game like they were mentioning earlier. So many times the kids are so used to on the spot. They want the immediate feedback. I want that game in front of me that's going to tell me exactly what I'm going to do next. Well, when you're doing this kind of test, you don't get that feedback right then. So the kids have to have the stamina and understanding that I'm going to be in an environment that's going to take more than 2 or 3 hours that they're going to sit there. So explaining and having those conversations with the kids early and saying to them, when you're in that room and you get stressed, what are you going to do? Have them tell you what they need to do, because sometimes they have a better idea than we can give them. To say to you, what makes you de-stress when you're sitting there and you feel like you're getting ready to throw up? Because some kids do feel like they're going to throw up.
Yes.
And what do you do when you start feeling that way? And I've even had kids say to me, Miss Brown, I think I'm going to throw up. And I would say, okay, let's stop and breathe. And start thinking about, where is your favorite place? Where is that thing that makes you calm down? What do you love in life? Go back to that piece in your head and think about that to de-stress yourself. So those types of things are really critical. Again, it goes back to the way that you approach it as a parent will dictate how your child approaches it. They're going to have the stress some from the teacher. I promise it's going to happen no matter what. You're going to feel that perspective in the classroom. But if the parent, if you can get your kid to understand, I'm not stressed about that test. Go in there and take it. It's easier said than done, because we already know that we are wanting our kid to do the very best they can. We want every kid to be a 5. However, that's not realistic. Kids are not all going to be a 5. If we prove to them that it's okay, that I'm not going to be upset with you, and that I love you and I care about you, and it doesn't matter how you do on that test, then they're going to do better.
At my house, I love what you said, because at my house we use the phrase more is caught than is taught. So I think it's important to talk to your child about that. They're so intuitive, and they're going to sense your nervousness. You might be saying one thing, but then you're texting the teacher, emailing the teacher, or looking up test taking things. So I think it's important to also let your actions match. The one thing that I wanted to mention too, it really doesn't have anything to do with the test taking, but I think it's an important life lesson in all of this, is that we all have to do things in life that we don't want to do, and that's character building. And, you know, this is going to be just one more of those things. In third grade, they're faced with their first, you know, academic related thing that I really don't want to do, because let's face it, who really wants to sit there for 3 hours and take a test? No one. But I think that that kind of builds our character stamina, if you will, because there's going to be so many more things in life that, you know, we don't want to do. But when we do it, and then we feel maybe we don't have a proficiency, but we feel a sense of accomplishment because, hey, I survived that, you know? I mean, I survived it, and everything's fine, and I'm still going to get recess today, and, you know, whatever mom and dad have promised me. But just the character building about, you know, teaching our children that life is about sometimes having to do things that we don't necessarily want to do.
And I would agree with both of you ladies. I think the routines are important. The positivity is important. You know, we kind of approach it at like Super Bowl day at my school, you know, rather than being, oh, testing day. Yeah. You know, it's, you know, this is the Super Bowl, you know, the day has come. We get to show everybody what you can do. And just that positive energy about it, I think is helpful. And I also, you know, that would be up until then. But on the day of, I also remind parents to try to stick to routine and try to be very cautious about helping your child keep their eye on the ball. There have been many mornings where I have, you know, had to talk with children that come in very upset because their anxiety level is up, their emotional levels are at peak. And, you know, something you know, they got fussed at for leaving their underwear on the floor in the bathroom, you know, or something. And, you know, they're at a point where they just can't handle that extra stuff that morning. And so just being cautious to kind of keep things even keel the morning of the test and take care of the laundry situation after school, so to speak, just to allow them to consume all of their energy towards handling their beginning of the day at school.
I was going to add too, I would add, find their favorite music. That morning, play their favorite music. Do not argue with the kid. I will tell you as a principal, I had more kids get out of the car on test taking day and say, my mom just fussed at me for X, or my mom got mad at me because I didn't get up in the morning when I was supposed to get up. Well, that starts their testing day on an already anxiety. So if you can eliminate that piece by saying, I'm going to put your favorite music on, we're going to eat breakfast in the morning together, we're going to leave together on a positive note, and you're going to go in there and take that test, and when you come out, we're going to have something planned that we're going to do that afternoon. And we're going to celebrate that you got through this day.
Yeah, right. I really didn't have anything else to add except I love the routine.
Yes.
You know, and I think you mentioned it before about eating the larger breakfast, because that can be not beneficial to this if they're not used to eating that big of a breakfast. Stick with the same routine, but also sleep patterns. You know, you're thinking, we're always saying, oh, get plenty of rest, get plenty of rest. Some parents might hear that as, oh, my child needs to go to bed 2 hours early, but it would not be a good idea, because then they're probably going to wake up 2 hours early, and then by the time they come to take the test, they're going to be exhausted. So, you know, just keeping in with that same routine, but just trying to make that same routine very pleasant, like you say, music.
And we don't mean go to bed on time the night before the test. We mean, you know, now start going to bed on time, so it builds up. So that's what they can start doing now, is making sure they go to bed on time. But yeah.
When we hear test anxiety and stress, we often think of students who struggle throughout the year will get real nervous come test time because they struggle. They know they struggle. What about the students who don't struggle throughout the year? Straight A students, they're used to that, and now this test comes, and they also have anxiety. How do you deal with that? Beth, let me start with you.
Well, I actually have to refer, and I know I should know the name of the lady that's done significant research on this. She's from Harvard, but you can Google it or YouTube it, but it's called power posing. And when you talk about students that typically do well during the school year, I find that those are the kids that often have more anxiety because they put more pressure on themselves than those students, the other students, and they are conditioned to not have that high bar for themselves. And so I often talk with students on the day of, the morning of, or sometimes in the middle of. They have to leave the room because their anxiety has gotten so high. And so we talk about power posing, and as silly as it sounds, and I hate that I cannot recite the lady's name. Amy Cuddy, that's it, thank you. But she has done a significant amount of research in showing that students that stand with a powerful stance, so hands on their hips or like an Olympic winner, She recommends 5 minutes, but I tell students, even if they're young, they're 8 or 9 years old, a lot of times they'll be in tears, but we'll just stand like this and cry. And there's something about the hormonal change in your body and the physiology that your brain is telling your nervous system that you are producing confidence, and that confidence helps them to then be able to go back in that room or to walk in that room for the first time and feel more confident about what they're doing. So that is a strategy that I've tried before, but it all goes back to recounting the steps of what are you in control of, what decisions have you made, to help them feel like they are in control of the situation that they're in. So.
I think for me, I love that. I'm going to use that, by the way. I think for me, I'm
You
learning
look
so
kinda
much
silly, but it's
today.
very
Like, I have made so many notes. I'm going to be. I already told them I'm going to be like the superstar at school tomorrow because I'm going to go in with all these ideas. And my friends go, "You are a genius." So for me, I think my approach is questioning the student, the student that is the high achiever. Okay, so let's have a conversation about this. Tell me when you have experienced this before. Was it before a math test? Was it before? Okay, now tell me how you did on that math test. Because I think it's actually reminding them, okay, I've been here before,
That's
and
true.
I performed well, and so that builds their confidence. So chances are, and maybe there's a couple of questions like that. Let's talk about past times when you felt the same way. So, just relying on their own experiences, drawing it out, because maybe they just got that blank where they feel like they're just a baby and they've just come in here and they don't know any math that day, but they really do. It's just like she said, it's just pulling it out of them. They have it, just pull it out.
So one of the things that I tried to do as a principal was we did interest inventories, and so at the beginning of the year when I realized that I have perfectionistic kids, we already had identified who those were. And I paired them up with a teacher that was on staff that was their very important person. So every day for testing, we have those kids go meet that very important person, and they have a conversation that morning so that they can de-stress or talk about any kind of anxiety that they may have, or what are they worried about? What is it that's currently on your mind? And so what I found was, not only with those kids, but we had our other students have a person that they could go to that was a different type of stress. So our level 1 or level 2 kids still had a very important person they went to find, but specifically for these kids, they were able to really articulate what was making them feel that way. Why do you feel this way? What is causing that to happen right now? Is it because that you really are walking into this day to take this test, or have you got something else that's bothering you that's causing you to have this added stress? So it did help us have that person that they already knew throughout the year was their person, that they were attached to, because I'm a firm believer in relationships, and if you have that relationship, I can go and hug you, and I can almost guarantee that I'm going to make you feel better just because I've grabbed you and put you in my arms to say I love you very much and you can do this, and just having that repertoire of going back and forth to each other. So that's what we did.
I have a couple more questions, but I'd like to refer to our audience
Yes.
and see what questions you might have for the panel.
This is really helpful so far, it really is. And just some background, I'm a career counselor here at LR, so that's why I know, so I use some of that with my students.
And thank you for knowing her name.
So yeah, I love it, but I use it with my students, but I wouldn't necessarily think of to use it with my third graders, so that's so helpful. And my student does really well on standardized testing, but doesn't want to fail either. He inherited some anxiety from his mom, and so I want to help him learn how to cope, help him reframe, and I tell him, honey, we're not looking at EOGs when you come to college, I promise you, we don't even know what those are. But I also don't want him to have a laissez-faire attitude either. It's about trying your best. And I do the same thing with our students taking the GRE. It's one piece of the puzzle. It's not everything, but this is really helpful just because I didn't even know some of the basics of how long the test was. I was curious, is it computer or is it bubble sheet? So that's really helpful.
Well, and I go back to, some of them are electronic now, so some of them are digital. Our science test is digital,
Okay.
and the state is looking to go full-fledged digital. So that's coming. We're not there yet, but it is coming. So right now we still have pencil, paper, and digital pieces. 8th grade takes them. 8th grade science is digital. So it's coming, so just be aware of that, and it is. It depends on the kid how long it ends up taking.
Okay.
Because sometimes they get done within that 3 hours, and some of them still are going. So it's just, it's really contingent on what's happening there.
And are the dates set yet? And
They are.
the same for everybody?
It's different for different schools.
There's a window.
There's a window, the last 10 days of school.
And we are completely digital at Jenkins, and I think HPS, we're all online reading, math, and we've had some practice. We do check-ins,
Yes.
3 times a year, which has been great, because I can't imagine if we had gotten these Chromebooks out and went digital, for the EOG, it would have been like, mass ca- we would have been the ones with the high anxiety,
Yeah.
pills. But we are, the kids, honestly, I think it has lessened, because, it's the computer age. It's the age of technology.
They're much more comfortable.
And they're
with
so
it.
much more comfortable, sitting there and in front of a computer screen and clicking that, clicking through. So I'm really
And
excited
for
about
us, I think it's, our teachers are more cautious of going to digital yet, because we are still in that age of, I want you to highlight everything, and I want you to underline.
Yeah.
You can do that on computer as well, but our teachers aren't comfortable with it yet, so we just haven't moved that far. I heard you say a while ago you were really worried about your student, and one of the things I would encourage is set goals with him. I don't know if you do that currently, but if you will let him set some goals of what it is what is your goal? What's my goal for this year? What's my goal going to be in 2 years? What's my goal going to be in 5 years? And even go, what's the goal for the month? Kind of set those goals periodically, and going back to them and celebrating when he makes those milestones, those pieces that he's made, will help maybe kind of eliminate some of that anxiety he may have for being, I don't want to fail. Okay, and what does failure mean to him? So have that conversation. What does it mean to fail? What's going to happen if you fail? I think sometimes we think that failure is the end all. We're not going to be able to live after we failed something, but I don't know about anybody else on this panel, but I can promise you I failed at a lot of things. So failure is not a bad thing. Failure helped me well.
And I think a lot of times, especially when we find students that are very hung up on that success rate and not failing, I kind of, to the adults in the room, I think about the scale and weight loss, and like we're so hung up on the number, and did we make the number? But doctors tell you to, measure your body and look at your, how you feel and those kinds of things. And so along with your student, you can, instead of looking at the score, talking about, setting goals, are you completing all of your homework? Are you, have you increased your Lexile level? And, just different components within the school year that are stepping stones that he can feel successful about, instead of waiting for that one number, because we all invest in that one number and we know we shouldn't, but just helping him find those mile markers ahead of time.
And that's something that we talked about. He took the VOGs in the middle of plenty of the tests throughout the year. And something that we do to diffuse it a little bit is make fun of the names, because they are kind of, you're just
Right. I agree.
The dog and
for
the
whatever.
dog.
That's
That's cute, I like that.
Your dwarf is great, Jackson.
Yes,
That's right. So that helps, and looking at the other measures of success, and I think are really helpful. Are those tests similar to what he's going to see, or is it going to be totally different? Like, is the VOG an approximation? Is it the content way different?
It is very similar, and I would say, obviously the content will be a little bit harder at the end of the year, and I think it is a little bit longer. And the check-ins, your child's probably been taking check-ins this year. I love the length of the check-ins. They're so much more appropriate. They're around 25 questions, 30 most, whereas EOGs are several more questions. And again, for an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old to stay with it that long, that's the hard part for me. But because you're looking at a cumulative test and lots of standards, they have to have so many questions to question, did they learn this standard
Is
and
that
this
why
standard
it's
and this
longer?
standard?
I am curious, that is a long time for anybody to
Yes.
sit down and focus. And while he does well on the test, the focus is a challenge. He's super active, so that is a challenge.
Yes.
And I see these, and I was curious, can he bring things? Can he bring this?
But it's in his pocket, and he doesn't take
As
it
long as
out.
no one sees it, then it's not in the record.
Okay.
If he takes it out, it can be a misadministration, so don't take it out.
Correct, yeah.
Let me tell you 2 things. One, the state has now moved to moving our math test is going to be shorter this year, which is a positive, which we've been asking for. The other thing is that if you go to DPI, you can find the amount of percentage of each area
Yes.
of what's on the test. And if you ask one of your teachers, they'll give it to you. because I do that with my curriculum. I give it to all my teachers to say, this amount of your test this year is going to be on fractions, so that it correlates to how much emphasis you're putting on fractions throughout the year, or how much you're putting on geometry. That they can tell you, like if your child may struggle with geometry, then you know if it's 50% of the test, then you need to really focus on that at home. So that is another way you can look at, what's that test basically going to be come around, so centered around. And I can send it to you if you want me to, I don't mind at all.
His teachers are great answering my
Yeah.
questions, so. So I don't want to inundate them, but yeah. So even, you can't bring anything with you in the tests?
Yes,
Yeah.
there's a lot of structure that comes along with the test, which there in itself creates a lot of pressure and anxiety.
Even that's different, I can imagine,
Yes.
right?
And the philosophy is that, again, if they're taking the test in Catawba County classroom, we want to make sure they're doing the exact same thing in Wilmington. And so there's a lot of pressure, and for the teachers and administrators, there's a great deal of training, and you need to make sure you can't have this in your hand, you can't have this turned on in your classroom. And so the purpose behind that is to make sure that every child gets the same experience. And each year and I know your school's probably the same, we always giggle because there's always a new rule about what you can't do. And that's because someone at some place did that, and they consider that not to really be fair to everyone else. And so it's meant to be a good thing, but it creates a little bit of pressure for everybody.
So what I was going to tell you is, I don't know, is your child's 3rd grade? Okay,
So that's another part, it's all new.
Right, and here's what I will, you may need to warn him of this. In the past, because I taught 3rd grade, so I can tell you all about this. I'm all about anchor charts, and so when I was teaching, I had things on my wall everywhere. When you take the test, everything has to come down. So it looks like you're living in a prison, okay? And I'll just be frank, it does. So when you come in and everything's off your wall and it's bare, first of all, to a kid who may have already some anxiety, I'm coming into a world where everything's been changed. So I tried to have that conversation early with them. Please understand that all of this is coming off the wall. So what I found was, but still have your teachers put it on the wall. I'm not saying that, because what my kids do when they were taking the test is they would look to where the spot was, that I had that information, and that would trigger it in their brain. But warn them, because he'll come in and it's going to be looking like a totally different place. And then he's like, what's happening? Kind of effect. So I would make sure he's aware.
Could he bring like a little thing of tissues and keep it in his pocket?
They'll have tissues there. I wouldn't bring them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so like going to
the
take,
pencils and everything.
when you go to take your test to get into college or whatever, and you go, it's similar to that. You walk in, you have your pencils and your body, and you sit in the chair, and you have a proctor walking around.
Do you already get locked down? You better lock out?
Yes.
Getting locked
And
down.
it is the
That
same.
is part of what I tell.
Now, the one difference is that they can get a book out at the end and read. They can. We used to not be able to do that. That changed. So at the end, if they finish, it used to be because they were afraid that they would just rush and be done. Now it is, they think it's a way to keep the kids occupied because they have to sit there until the end of the testing session, so they can get a book out to read.
Any other questions for folks?
Did you see any questions back there?
I don't see them pulling up.
Okay.
Well,
If you're thinking, just 2 quick things, if I can, very quickly, since you've already shared this with me earlier. How about some very quick tips for parents of children with autism?
So I said one of the things that I would use is to find something that they enjoy, whatever that is. Take a little picture of that and put it in their pocket. Or I did worry rocks, and I had them decorate their worry rock. And whatever that reminded them of, they put on their worry rock, and they put that in their pocket. So when they're taking the test, they can feel it in their pocket and then rub on it to make them feel like, oh, I understand, I'm okay. It's all right.
So that's okay in the pocket.
As long as you don't take it
You
out.
gotta stay in the pocket.
Do not let them take it out.
See, and I was thinking of the brain there, that I may take one of those and
Yes,
have him put it in his pocket and say, this is my brain,
Yes.
I'm smart.
that's right,
I'm gonna
that's
keep
right.
touching my brain, and it's not a bad idea. Anything else you add, Renee?
Well, I just was mentioning, especially with the autism question, have something planned, for after the test. I think it's truly important for those particular learners because I know that their thought process, and that would be something that, through the test, and if he's, thinking about, okay, after I get this done, I don't know what he calls you, my pawpaw said, we're gonna go to Sweet Frog, and, I'm gonna get marshmallows. I mean, make it very specific, make it very specific for him what you're gonna do, so I think that's important.
And I think for me, one of the strategies I would recommend is something like you asked earlier that you could do ahead of time, and you could still do on the day of. But I find that with any child, but especially a child with autism, just being able to process on their level what's going on and how they feel about a certain thing. One of the strategies that I use with students is I just use 4 blocks, and in the blocks I put happy, sad, mad, scared. And so I bring up the topic and I'll just say, what about testing makes you feel happy? And they might come up with, well, it's close to the end of the year. What makes you feel, sad, scared, and mad, and those kinds of things. And just by having the identifying factor in the picture and helping them process orally. Another strategy that I like to use is a number line, 0 through 10. And for us to ask a child how they feel about something, they have to articulate in words, which is very challenging for them at times, especially if they're stressed out. So sometimes I would just say, what number are you at? But it has to be a routine that you establish. And from 0 being the lowest they've ever felt, it's the worst they've ever felt, to 10 being the happiest they've ever felt, you can have a very quick check-in with them. What number are you at? And they might say a 5. And so then my next step with them is, what can you do, or how can I help you get to a 6? What can we do to get to a 6? And so that kind of opens up the conversation for some ways to empower them again to be in control and make some decisions for themselves. It helps me to see, like, if they're identifying a 1 through 2, it's a really big deal for them right now. Whereas if you just have them give you words, you might not hear that because it might sound the same at an 8 to a 2, but that gives you kind of a reference. So just processing with them up ahead of time before that testing day, and then of course on the day too.
As we wrap up, is there anything that we've not touched upon that you want to at least close with, the last things you may have thought about that we didn't touch upon, or any final thoughts you want to share with parents? And Tammy, we'll start with you.
I would say find joy in every day. Find something happy about every day, whether it's a testing day or whether it's any other day anything that's happening. Find something that you find happiness within your child and in what's happening in the home, and have that conversation. Just continue to trust them and let them know that you believe in them.
I couldn't agree more. Just letting your child know how much you love them, and you're going to love them unconditionally, no matter what a piece of paper says. I totally agree. That's great.
I think for me it comes back to a repeat of just empowering them. They are young, and the world is a very big place, and it's a very overwhelming place. But teaching them at an early age that they do have control over some things, and allowing them to choose some things such as their clothes on the day of the test, and allowing them the opportunity to be in charge of things, I think, are the baby steps to what builds confidence and helps them see that they can have some decision making over that situation.
And I will say this on behalf of our panelists. Each school needs proctors.
Yes, yes we do.
For
Thank you very much.
end of grade and end of year tests, so if you can donate some time to your child's school, I'm sure the schools will be most appreciative of it. Thank you all very much. And thank our audience too.
Thank you. And this ends De-Stress the Test.